For me, February 16th holds a very different meaning. 38 years ago, when I lost my father. My father had esophagus cancer, and the decision he made was to not have treatment for it because he knew the survival rate wasn't great, and B, more significant for my mother and I, was to not share that news with us. I was super angry. And time heals all wounds is a lie. Closure is a myth, and time heals all wounds is a lie. And I thought that church was going to explode. And at some point, people really stopped caring that you're grieving, that you have to live with it yourself. Closure is a myth. There is no such thing. It never entirely goes away. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Brick City Brown Chick Show. This is season 4, episode 3, and the episode is called Grief. What is it good for? I am your host, the aforementioned Chick, and today I'm going to talk about something that we as Americans don't do a good job of talking about, and that is grief and grieving. I am 55, so I have lived long enough to have lost a significant number of people in my life. Family, friends, grandparents, the lot. And so I know quite a bit about grief from a personal level, and I wanted to share with people how grief changes over the course of a long period of time. I am taping this episode on Monday, February 16th, which for most of America is President's Day. That's what today marks. We've combined the birthdays of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, which used to be separate days, and we've combined that into President's Day. For me, February 16th holds a very different meaning. This marks the day 38 years ago when I lost my father. I was 17 years old. If you're not quick with the math, 55 minus 38 is 17. I was a high school senior. I was getting ready for all the senior craziness, graduation, prom, all that sort of thing. I had put in all my college applications, and I was waiting for them to come back. My father had been sick for a significant period of time. The last 6 weeks of his life were spent in a hospital. It's a very long story, which if you're interested in a longer version, I do cover that in season 1, so you can go through my archives and check that out. I think that episode is close to 45 minutes. That's the detailed version. The short version is my father had esophagus cancer or esophageal cancer. In the 1980s, the survival rate for esophageal cancer, even if you received treatment, was about 15 to 20%. It was not high at all. My father knew this. He had several conversations with his doctor about it. And the decision he made was to not have treatment for it because he knew the survival rate wasn't great, and B, more significant for my mother and I, was to not share that news with us. My mother found out he was dying maybe a month before he died, and I didn't find out until a couple of weeks before he died. My mother was obviously very upset and distraught and angry with him for not telling her. And then she took on the stance of it was his responsibility to tell me as his daughter. That was something he was not ready to do, not willing to do, however you want to look at it. So I honestly don't remember at this point in time how I found out or who told me. I know it wasn't him, and I know it wasn't my mother, but I honestly don't remember who it was. I think I've consciously blocked that out. So there was already significant emotional trauma around his death when he did die. My parents were married for 27 and a half years when he died. They were married about 10 years before they had me. That was a conscious decision on their part. They wanted to be older and more mature and ready to settle down before they had a child. And I thank them every day for that decision because I've known so many people my age who come from destructive or dysfunctional families because their parents were so young. And my parents, by waiting, gave me the gift of stability. So I am very grateful for that. After my father's death, my mother and I struggled mightily, I will say, for a very long time. He was what I like to call the buffer. He was we'll call it a wedge. He was the wedge or the stopgap between my mother and I. My mother and I had a very complicated relationship, I'll call it. It was just very tricky, and he was always the person who kept the peace. You know, whenever people say, why can't you just keep the peace? My father was the one who kept the peace. So once he was gone, the fractures that have always existed in my relationship with my mother became much more prominent. They went from like fractures to fault lines. And she was grieving her husband. I was grieving my father. Those are very different places to be. And it was not easy between us for a long time. And when I say a long time, I mean probably 25 years, because we were in very different places and we chose to handle our grief very differently. My mother is pretty stoic, and I would not describe her as an emotional person. That's not to say she's unemotional and doesn't feel things. That's just to say that she doesn't wear her heart on her sleeve. That's not who she is. That is totally the opposite of who I am. I wear my heart on my sleeve. If I am upset or sad or fill in the blank, I will tell anybody and everybody. That's just how I am. So she and I are very different that way, and so our grief was very different that way. There's an expression I heard years ago that goes, grief grows you up fast. And that's very true. I was 17 going on, I don't know, 35, probably something like that. When I got to college, I was in a very different mindset than my peers were. They were all excited and ready for this next adventure in their life. And I was just sort of going through the motions and trying to survive. I was at college because When I went to college, it was important that you had a degree and that you were prepared for the world outside, but I was not emotionally ready to be there. What I had wanted to do when my father died was take a year off, get a job, and sort of pull myself back together emotionally. My mother would have none of it. What she said was, if I let you do this, your father will haunt me. Because she thought once I got out into the world and started working, that I would never go to school, that I would never go back. So one of the things we fought pretty strenuously about was my going to school, right? And figuring out my life. So she ended up winning that battle. Obviously, I went to school, but trying to grieve in a college environment where you live on campus. I was 6 hours away from home, away from family, away from all my childhood friends. It was a really big struggle. And the additional piece to that is that I was super angry. I was angry with my father. I was angry with my mother for forcing me to do this when I thought I wasn't ready. And I was angry with God. I was real angry with God. And so my first year of college was a serious struggle. I did well. I got good grades. That's who I am. That's how I'm wrapped. But the social part of college and coping with everything I was coping with, and then trying to cope with the fact that I was in this school that was like 95% white, and there were racial issues and all that. It was a whole lot to deal with as what I became as an 18-year-old. It was a lot. So that was the early stages of my grieving process. As I moved into my 20s, I became less angry, which is a positive thing. But my 20s marked the time when I was confused. I was questioning a lot of what happened. I was questioning why, above all else, my father made the decision he chose to make, and to not tell my mother or myself that he was dying. And of course, that's a question that nobody could answer but him, and he was no longer here. So my 20s were a time of just being confused and being upset and sort of trying to, as the expression goes, trying to come to Jesus about what had happened, right? That was my 20s. My 30s, I got married in my late 20s. I was 29. So my 30s was really more focused on, my husband and the life we were building and all that sort of thing. But it was also a time where I think I came to a place where I decided, okay, what has happened has happened. I can't change it. I can't fix it. I can't alter it. All I can do is cope with the reality of what is. And that is much easier said than done, right? When we have these sort of burning questions, we want answers, right? And there really were no answers. Now, in my late 30s, a coworker of mine suggested that I go see a medium. Now, people think, you mean a fortune teller? No, I don't mean a fortune teller. A medium is a person that, if you believe, has the ability to communicate with the dead. So the way a medium works is you sit with them, you tell them sort of bare bones information about yourself, and they have for lack of a better word, visions of people who come to them and they will tell you things about that person. And it's your job to figure out who they're talking about because they have no idea. They have a description of the person they're seeing, but they don't know that person's relationship to you. And so this coworker thought it might be good for me emotionally if I went to see a medium. Now, there was no promise and no guarantee that the medium would see my father or anyone else I knew. She might just describe people to me that were generic that I had no idea who she meant. But that was a chance I was willing to take. So I went to see her. I don't know that she's famous, but she's had a fascinating life story. She was a World War II survivor of the bombing of London and immigrated to the United States. So I'm sure she's passed on now. When I saw her, she was well into her 80s and had this beautiful sort of cottage house that had all sorts of flowers around it. You immediately thought of like an English cottage in a village that was her home. And so I went to her and she described a couple of people from my past. She described my grandmother very clearly. She described an uncle that had passed on when I was very young. And then she got to my father. And she never said,
seems like yesterday we were playing
this is your father, because she didn't understand the relationship of this person. But she asked me if I had any questions. And so my question was not why he didn't tell us. My question was, did he understand that I was no longer angry? And the response she got was, he understands that, but his question to you is, if he had told you, what difference would it have made? Now, I couldn't react in the moment because I was thinking, WTF, are you kidding me right now? But afterwards, what I realized the question meant was, if he had told my mother and I, if we had known, what difference would our knowing have made? He would have, the result would have been the same. He still would have died, right? So what would have been the point? Now, I initially thought that was super flippant and like, what do you mean? But as I've gotten older, I've come to understand what that meant and why he phrased the question the way he did. So my experience with the medium was positive for me. I don't say that would work for everybody, because if that's not something you believe in, it's not going to work for you. But it left me in a better place mentally. So that was my 30s. My 40s, I spent a lot of time, when I thought about my father, remembering the good parts, right? Because at some point in your grieving process, you can't just keep remembering the ending, because the ending was just so hurtful and so devastating that you want to remember good things that happened. And so I could go through family pictures and have a better view of my life and the gifts he gave me, as opposed to the final weeks of his life. Now, move forward into my 50s, my mother turned 90 almost 2 years ago, and she wanted I guess we'll call it like a celebration of life. So she wanted a gathering of her family and friends where she could be celebrated while she was here. So it's kind of like the idea of a living wake, right? The person you're talking about and remembering is still here. So they can hear, the changes they made and the good things about their life and all that sort of thing. So when I was preparing for that, I was preparing a slideshow, and I went to her house in North Carolina and got a whole bunch of photos. And they're photos that I remember, but had not seen in a really long time. So I got to see pictures of my parents at their anniversary parties and their costume parties and the backyard weddings that took place in our house when I was a kid, and even some weddings that took place before I was born, and all the happy, positive times that the three of us got to spend together. So now, as a woman in my mid-50s, I think I have gone through a lot of the grieving process. But what I want people to understand is grief is something that never entirely goes away. A few years ago, my godfather died. And at his funeral, I got up and spoke and talked about him and my memories. But I talked directly to his children. At that point, my father had been gone 20 odd years, I guess. And what I said to his children, who were grown people, like I was that closure is a myth and time heals all wounds is a lie. And I thought that church was going to explode. Hands, that God will take it away. It will all go away. And that is not my experience. That is not the experience of most people I know. You learn to cope with the grief because you have to move on, because life continues moving forward. And at some point, people really stop caring that you're grieving, that you have to live with it yourself. But grieving is a really personal thing, even within families, with siblings. Everybody grieves differently. So that's really important for people to understand. And I hear people talk about closure a lot. And I tell everybody everybody I know personally, that closure is a myth. There is no such thing. It never entirely goes away. My father has been dead for 38 years. And you can see my reaction to this episode is that it still makes me sad. And that's what I mean by closure doesn't exist. It just doesn't. And time heals all wounds also doesn't exist. Time fades things. It helps you cope. The distance helps you see things that you didn't see before. Could I have even gotten through this episode maybe 15 years ago? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, am I in a different space than I was before? Absolutely. Do I accept that I will never be completely over it? I hear that phrase too. Why aren't you over it? Because if you truly love someone, you're never over it. And that's really what I wanted to say today. I want to thank everybody for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.